Welcome back to the Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you. And part of last week, I talked about the situation at the University of Washington, where they have 12, just 12 volleyball scholarships for women, which makes them very sought after because a full ride scholarship to a first class university in Division I volleyball is a big deal. And then we were told that a young man from Sherman Oaks, California, had committed to the University of Washington. He was going to get that scholarship. As of today, there seems to be some pullback, so we don't know precisely the status of that 12th volleyball scholarship at the University of Washington. But I told you, this is a threat to every young lady in your family who seeks to, say, participate in sports and be treated equitably. And that would be fair, and then perhaps be able to pursue a scholarship to fund her education, higher education. I thought we'd talk about that with Norman Woods, who's director of a group called SD, South Dakota Family Voice. Mr. Woods, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Is the latest stat that University of Washington has now rescinded its offer of that volleyball scholarship to the young man from California? Because if so, that's great. That's progress, isn't it?
Yes, I know things are definitely in play, and like you said, there was questions, and really there should be, because it's very clear to the nation what's going on here. So we're glad to see that there's now question marks.
Now, does that open up the opportunity, at least in your view, that this means we can beat them? Because I've spent 5 years talking about this issue off and on with all the other issues we talk about, and I've said, hey, when are you parents and grandparents going to stand up and understand they're going to cheat your daughter or granddaughter out of an opportunity? And if you let them do it, they'll do it. And if you stand up and object, there's a chance we can beat them. And I got to tell you something, Mr. Woods, I haven't had very much response. And I'm frankly not seeing very much response at all until this most recent issue over the volleyball scholarship.
Well, on that respect, I have some encouraging news to share with you then, because, if we rewind, let's say 5, 6, 7 years, this question was kind of a canary in the coal mine question. The people who were first pointing out, hey, wait a second, if we're going to let males identify as females, what's that going to do to sports? Even 5, 6, 7 years ago, people were starting to ask those questions really loudly. And at that point, elected officials really didn't care. They didn't give them the time of day. It was seen as a fringe issue. Republicans, by and large, didn't want to touch it. Let's just not talk about that. Fast forward to today, 22 states have passed legislation at the state level to protect women's sports. And you take in South Dakota, for example. Again, when the bills were first introduced, a lot of legislators didn't want to touch it. If you compare, a few years ago, we have a written response from one senator who, in very bureaucratic terms, said, no, I don't care. I'm not going to touch it. People stood up. It became a nationwide issue because moms and dads and grandparents stood up. The very next year, that legislator had their name on it. They wanted to be in press conferences. They wanted their picture taken with the groups. They had totally changed because they saw that people cared. So this is one of those issues that for most of America still, it's really simple. A male's a male, a female's a female.
And Mr. Woods, that's why this one, of all the issues we talk about, a lot of them can be thorny, they can be difficult, but this one seemed to be one that on its face was very clear cut. If you let men start to compete with women in athletics, high school or college, the men are going to win a huge amount, if not all of the time. And you say, well, given that, I just wonder to myself, all these people on all these accreditation boards or the various agencies that sanction sports at the college or high school level, you'd think they'd have said, well, we can't let, say, young ladies be forced to run against biological men because the men are going to win. They may not win every time, but they're going to win a disproportionate amount of the time. And everything we just did with Title IX over the last several decades is going to go for naught. It kind of floored me that this wasn't one where the immediate reaction from all of the sanctioning bodies wasn't we're not going there, period. End of story. Instead, they all to a greater or lesser extent kind of cozied up to it and said, yeah, sure, we can do that. Let them compete. And there is no competition. If you look at Leah Thomas and the complaints that Riley Gaines has brought up, and she's been a champion on this one, and I want to give her full credit
Absolutely.
for that. But you'd think, I kept pointing out to my audience, I said, go back and look it up if you don't believe me. Men beat the 4-minute mile in the 1950s. They are now well under 4 minutes in track and field, for example. Women have never hit the 4-minute mile. and may physically not. Maybe they will someday, but in 75 years, the closest they come is like 408. And you say, now apply that to every other sport. And I use volleyball as an example. I said, can you imagine a couple of 6'2" ringers playing on a women's volleyball team and just hammering their opponents every single time? It's too attractive for coaches, for schools, and to appear to be politically correct. And it's going to push women right out of competition. And now, well, maybe UW has regained its senses, but it struck me that it should have been an easy one at the front. Not, well, let's see how this works, but we know how it's going to work. It's predictable how it's going to work, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And honestly, I think at the beginning, a lot of these, whether it's colleges or legislators or whoever it is, when the left demanded that they let a few students play on the opposite sex team, I think a lot of these institutions just kind of like looked the other way and assumed, hey, maybe it won't be that bad. Maybe we can, speak their language. We can refer to this boy as a girl. We can let them play, and maybe it'll be fine, and the social pressure will go away. The political pressure will go away. The left will stop, and, maybe it won't be that bad. But the entire country has watched that, yes, reality still has a hold. It has been that bad. They've seen the swimmers swim against the girls. They've seen volleyball players, guys playing against the girls. Guys' bone density, lung capacity, muscle mass. I mean, everybody has seen it on their television screens and on their phone screens.
Yeah, and the end result is, and here's where, Mr. Woods, I'm talking to Norman Woods, who's director of South Dakota Family Voice, the place where usually I'll ask my producer, I'll say, what's motivating somebody to do this? Not like a film director saying, what's your motivation? But I'm saying, and I tell them, in my world, at least my worldview, three things motivate almost everything in human existence and have for as long as humans have been around: money, sex, and power, or a combination of the three. And so when you say, let's see, what's in it let's say, and I don't know that we've had this happen yet, but we could. A young man walks in and says, yeah, I'm a reasonably decent swimmer, track and field, volleyball, whatever. But I'm not at the top of the game compared to the other guys. So I'm going to identify as a woman. And given the loose standards for identifying as a woman, it's not after your surgery, after years of hormones. There's not even a consistent standard for that. You'd say, you mean all I have to do is say, yeah, I'm a girl, and I'm going to dress differently and go by a different name, and I get a college education for free. And maybe even win some sports records at the same time. So I get something worth several $100,000 or at least $100,000 for a 4-year degree. Who's not? I mean, how are you not going to find a whole bunch of people lining up to say, yep, I'm in for that one? And then they go in and they completely wipe the women out of competition. And they get a free education. And when they're done with that, they can go back and say, yep, I'm a guy. And that's it. I couldn't imagine that their idea that, well, we'll have a few people who will take part in sports, but it won't be a big deal. It'll be a rounding error. Don't worry about it. Let it run its course, and it'll be over. Not when you're dangling $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 educations out there.
Correct. It's a little more harsh, but they say that women's sports has become the new landing place for mediocre males if we continue down this road. Yeah. And it's important to always remember in all of these things, no matter how crazy things look like they're starting to get, to always remember that biology bats last. Biology bats last. At the end of the day, the male swimmer, people are going to see the results. And the track team, or in Connecticut, 2 males in a short amount of time took 14 or 15 state titles that used to be held by 9 different women. So again, what was their motivation? Were they specifically faking it? We don't need to theorize. But you can quickly see that, yes, a mediocre male athlete can identify as female and quickly take all the titles.
You know what you ought to do is start every one of the hearings on this with 10 minutes from Tootsie and say, would a desperate male dress up like a woman to get a top-notch job and a big paycheck? You bet, every day of the week. That's Norman Woods from South Dakota Family Voice. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show.